The Elector Galdrach threaded his way among the narrow streets, counting the turnings to be sure he wouldn't lose his way. A different meeting place every time. Even I'm not that cautious. Of course, Galdrach had countless advisers, servants, men-at-arms, and general hangers-on who could be relied on to keep out eavesdroppers, whereas this fellow had 4 men in hooded grey cloaks. And the horse. Don't forget the horse. It still surprised him, in a place that used 4-legged transport less than just about anywhere else in the Empire, how many stables the city possessed. He stepped around a pile of rubbish, steaming in the heat. Every time he thought he was getting used to the stench of the warren, it slapped him in the face again, reminding him he didn't belong here. He glanced behind, confirming that his guards were still following at a discreet distance. They were dressed in the right sort of clothes, but they looked out of place, as if they'd rather be back in their barracks. They weren't the only ones. At last he stopped outside a wooden building that seemed barely big enough for the 5 men, never mind the horse. The Temple of Rakeloff stood a few doors down, so he wasn't that far from where he'd started. He guessed he'd been given a deliberately roundabout route to shake off followers. Galdrach took a deep breath and lifted his fist to knock. The door opened almost immediately. One of the hooded men stood there. Galdrach craned his neck to look at him and hesitated. This was the first time he had seen one in daylight, and he could have sworn there was nothing under the hood. The man raised an arm, motioning him to enter, and the sun glinted off a flat surface in the middle of the hood. Idiot. It's just a black mask. He brushed past the man and into the building. The door swung shut behind him. A deep orange light, like a candle but somehow darker, came from further back in the room, suggesting its contents rather than illuminating it. He looked around for the other cloaked men, not seeing them. They had a knack of staying out of sight until they were needed. It took more courage than he thought he had not to turn and run. "I would not harm you, Elector," came a voice from the far end of the room. It seemed to echo as though the speaker was in a much larger space. At least, not without good reason. The man spoke with refined precision, in a slight accent that Galdrach couldn't place. "Shadrach be with you too, Caravash," replied Galdrach, hating the shakiness in his voice. Was the man just a shrewd guesser, or could he really read minds? From head to foot, Caravash was clad in metal armor, so black it seemed darker than the shadows. Spikes projected from each joint, curved and twisted like horns. The helmet resembled an upturned bucket, with a narrow slit for the eyes. Caravash's horse, almost as black as his armor, stood next to him, eyes glistening. Galdrach had thought horses were skittish creatures, prone to whinnying and neighing, but this animal was silent and motionless, but for the occasional flick of its ears or swish of its tail. Caravash said, "The revenue service will raid one of your warehouses before dawn on Caradar's day." A chill stole over him, not because of the raid. Those happened almost every fortnight now, and were no more than a minor nuisance even when he didn't know about them in advance, but because of the confidence with which Caravash spoke. He could have been talking about the sun rising tomorrow. "Which one?" said Galdrach. "My informant believes the target will be Ashharak, or Ashtanabi. Kelstack will make his final decision as close to the time as possible. Apparently he suspects one of his staff is in your pay." "Only one?" "Also Pyram is bluffing about being in negotiations with another supplier. If you lower your price by perhaps 5%, he will accept." "I had suspected as much, but it's useful to hear it from someone else." "I have given you something of value," said Caravash. The orange light grew dimmer, and the room seemed to shrink. "Now it's your turn." One of the cloaked men approached. He extended a gloved hand, offering a slate. Galdrach accepted it. The man leaned forward in approximation of a bow, and then withdrew with a loping gait that made it hard to be sure whether he was walking forwards or backwards. Galdrach squinted at the slate. The writing resembled not exactly that of a child or a foreigner, but of someone who wasn't used to the imperial script. The lettering was stiff, and Galdrach wondered if the cloakman had kept his gloves on while writing. "It is a list of resources we require for the next stage," said Caravash. "I can see that," said Galdrach. Some of these things, they're not going to be easy to obtain. I am willing to cover any extra costs you incur. It's not a matter of cost. I mean, a copy of the decrees of Emperor Velekna. You do know he's been dead over 2,000 years, and that later emperors have amended or revoked every one of his decrees. I did not summon you here to give me an history lesson, Elector. You need not concern yourself with my reasons for needing any of those items. Well, the nearest copy of that book is probably in Akhtar. It'll take a fortnight and a half to get it, assuming my man there can persuade the owner to sell it. Then our plan will be delayed by a fortnight and a half. No! Galdrak took a step forward. The cloaked man moved to block his path. A second one came from the other side, faster than should have been possible. Galdrak held up his hands and retreated, head bowed. I mean, I'll make every effort to get it sooner. He stopped himself from clenching his fists. If anyone else dared to speak to him like that, he'd have them flogged, if they were lucky. But the results would be worth every insult, if the plan came together on time. Good. There is one other matter. The last batch of dust was insufficiently pure. Galdrak gulped. We agreed 1 pound in 12. Caravash didn't answer immediately. There have been difficulties in the refinement process. Henceforth the purity must be 1 pound in 6. Out of the question, Galdrak spluttered. The priests have already caught at least 4 miners trying to smuggle dust onto the spoil heap. We don't need to give them any more reason to come looking for us. Then find more miners who can be bribed. Anybody who's willing to help already is. I'm paying them more than they earn in a fortnight for each pound they bring out. In that case, the priests will have to be persuaded to be less zealous in their inspections. That took a moment to sink in. Bribe a priest of Tanshal? Are you serious? Blackmail is another possibility. You're mad, Galdrak whispered. Many have said similar things, Caravash replied. Galdrak thought he heard a hint of amusement. Some men are difficult to persuade, but I have never yet encountered one who could not be persuaded at all. Unless you raise the purity to 1 pound in 6, our plan will not finish on time. Galdrak sighed. Always it came back to that. I'll see what I can do. There might be another way. Is there anything else? That is all. Then I'll bid you good day. As Galdrak turned to the door, he said, Actually, there is one other thing. My aunts are trying to get the house back. Why is that a problem? You said your uncle bequeathed it to you. They have no claim on it. They say my uncle made a codicil to his will that leaves it to them. Some of their men might try to interfere with what you're doing there. Galdrak wasn't sure what Caravash was doing at the house, which suited him. The less he knew, the less he could tell the Governor-General or the other electors, should they become curious. Strange that they have said nothing about it until now. They said they were going to hire an advocate to find it. Then they do not possess it? It would seem prudent to ensure that they do not come to possess this codicil. I have a couple of people I can give that task to, said Galdrak. Good day, then. Outside, Galdrak blinked as his eyes adjusted to the daylight. His guards emerged from doorways and alleys and followed him as he set off home. He would need a long bath when he got there, not just to wash off the dirt and the stink of the warren, but to get rid of the feeling that Caravash, not him, was the one running this circus. Something about that man. No, everything about the man made his skin crawl. But he had no choice. Without Caravash's help, Galdrak stood no chance of becoming the next Governor-General.
Hello there. I'm Stephen J. Pemberton, the author of the Barefoot Healer series. I hope you enjoyed that reading from Dust and Water. If you'd like to read more or find out where to buy a copy, please visit my website at www.pembers.net. Thanks.